What's going on, fantasy friends? Happy Saturday. Let's get into this Week 9 starter sit. First up, we have the Steelers at the Cowboys. Over under 42.5 with the line Pittsburgh being favored by 14.5 points. Now, if you looked at this matchup before this season started, obviously this would have been an awesome game to watch. A lot of people would be looking forward to it. But now, obviously, with what's transpired, this game isn't going to be that exciting. I'm sure probably some people might even be looking to miss it. But right here, we have the Steelers projected to win by 2 touchdowns. So expect James Conner and even Benny Snell to get a lot of work in a game in which the Steelers will be ahead early and scoring points often against a dreadful defense and possibly even worse offense. Big Ben and James Conner are great starts for the week. All three of the Steelers' top wide receivers are also startable this week. However, Ebron, as the tight end, might be a little too touchdown dependent to start, but a good fantasy matchup for just about all Steelers here. Now, on the other side for the Cowboys, you can start Zeke as a low-end RB2 play, but honestly, it isn't out of the question to sit Zeke if you happen to be very deep at running back. The Steelers' run defense is the best in the league. Zeke does seem to have some hammy problems, and the Cowboys' offense has been very poor, and so has Zeke. He does not look like the Zeke of old, and neither does this Dallas Cowboys team. Now, you can still start Tony Pollard if Zeke happens to sit out in Week 9. As for the rest of the offense, I don't see how you can start any of these wide receivers with confidence, even when the Steelers are just a middling team when it comes to protecting against the pass. Pittsburgh is susceptible to the big play against wideouts, but knowing who that will come from is quite the guessing game. Amari Cooper can be started as a flex play, and CeeDee Lamb also as a low-end flex play. Good luck to you, Garrett Gilbert. Next game, the Broncos and the Falcons. Over under 50, Atlanta favored by 4 points. Falcons have a terrible pass defense, but they do surprisingly have a pretty good run defense. Now, it definitely lowers Melvin Gordon's and Philip Lindsay's fantasy outlooks, but both can still be started. Gordon has a high-end flex as he's played fairly well this season, and Lindsay has a low-end flex. As previously mentioned, the Falcons' pass defense is a wonderful matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. Unfortunately, if you're Jerry Jeudy or Tim Patrick, you have Drew Lock throwing you the ball. Now, Drew Lock is never considered startable, even after his 3-touchdown comeback win against the Chargers. He's just not. Look at those stats. Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick are both low-end flex plays. Jeudy has the much safer floor here than Tim Patrick, only because there is a possibility that Patrick does re-aggravate that hammy injury that has him carrying a questionable injury designation heading into this week. Noah Fant, just start him every week. He seems to be the man out there. As for the Falcons, Julio is a wide receiver one every week he plays, and so is Ridley. But the big question is whether Ridley will be playing in the first place. Now, this is something you will have to monitor before Sunday's game, as there hasn't been a lot of information regarding whether or not he will play. If he doesn't play, then Russell Gage gets a bump up in fantasy value, making him a low-end flex play. We have to remember that the Denver defense is still quite formidable. This is going to make it tough for Todd Gurley this week, who is entering a poor stretch of fantasy matchups. The window for selling high on Gurley is closing. Now, Hayden has been a good start all season. That doesn't change this week, but as for Matt Ryan, he's just too risky to be played in 10 and 12 leagues. Now, if Ridley plays, feel free to start him in 12-team leagues, but if Ridley misses week 9, then Matty Ice should only be considered in 14-team leagues and bigger. Coming up next, Seahawks at the Bills, over under 55, with Seattle favored by 3. Now, this game is going to be awesome. Two high-powered offenses with two fantasy studs at the helm for both playoff-bound teams. Russell Wilson, Lockett, and DK are must-starts every week, and with Carson and Hyde out once again, it's time for DJ Dallas to steal the show for his second straight week. Now, for the Bills, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs have the potential for massive fantasy outputs. John Brown is also on track to play even with that calf strain still lingering. Now, there won't be a better matchup for these Bills wide receivers all season. As for the Bills running back situation, Moss really feels like the only startable back when both Moss and Singletary are playing. He's taking all the valuable touches in the passing game and near the goal line, and Moss even outsnapped and outtouched Singletary in Week 8. We're calling Moss a high-end flex play and Singletary a sit this upcoming week. Next up, Bears and the Titans, over under 46.5, Tennessee favored 6.5 points. The Titans have an average run defense, but a very, very poor pass defense, especially against wide receivers. The Titans have given up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers, so Allen Robinson is a stud wide receiver one this week. Darnell Mooney has emerged as the number 2 wide receiver of the Bears, ahead of Anthony Miller. Now, it's difficult to trust either one, especially with the quarterback situation, but Mooney has been getting more volume and fantasy points over the past 3 weeks, so Mooney can be considered as a low-end flex, and Anthony Miller is a sit. David Montgomery is still a solid start every week because of his guaranteed volume and usage in the passing game. As for the Titans, start old King Henry every week, and even though it's a tough matchup, you can still start Tannehill, A.J. Brown, and Corey Davis. Davis is the safest flex play in fantasy football right now. You have to love that 10-point floor. As for Jonnu Smith, not sure what's been happening the past 3 weeks with Jonnu, but after his hot start in the 2020 season, he's cooled off so much that he's just an auto bench until he shows us that he can score more than 4 fantasy points. Now the Ravens at the Colts, over under 48 with an even line for this game. Lamar Jackson is still a start, but that's about it. He's not the Lamar Jackson of 2019. We've seen enough to prove that. His rushing does give him a safe floor, and that makes him safe from being a bust. As for the Baltimore backfield, Mark Ingram is currently doubtful to come back from his high ankle sprain in Week 9. This makes J.K. Dobbins a low-end RB2, as he just looked awesome last week, getting 121 total yards on 16 touches. Even when Ingram returns, J.K. Dobbins will be the best RB in the backfield. Gus Edwards is a low-end, touchdown-dependent flex, once again, who happened to pay off for fantasy owners last week. Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews are also starts. Andrews has to be started every week. Now, when it comes to Hollywood Brown, he has expressed disappointment in his usage in the offense. I'm sure fantasy owners have expressed the same disappointment all season, and Lamar did back his disgruntled wide receiver as well. I believe Lamar will be looking for Hollywood's way quite a bit this weekend to try and keep his best wideout somewhat happy in this Baltimore offense. For the Colts, Jonathan Taylor can be considered nothing more than a flex play. Taylor has been battling an ankle injury, only posting 31 total yards last week, and now has to go against the second best run defense in football. You can also start Trey Burton and Nyheim Hines, but that's really about it for this game. Panthers at the Chiefs, over under 53. Kansas City minus 10.5 for that line. Panthers finally get CMC back. Sucks for Mike Davis owners, including myself, but CMC owners deserve to have their first round pick back from injury. He's a monster. CMC is a start, Mike Davis a sit, especially because the Chiefs actually have a pretty good defense. DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson are solid wide receiver 2s for the week, but their floor isn't super safe as the Chiefs don't allow many touchdowns to opposing wideouts. As for the Chiefs, CEH and Le'Veon should be solid RB2 flex plays against the Panthers. The Panthers, a very young defense, have gotten better as the season has gone on. The Panthers' pass defense ranks in the top 5 against opposing wideouts, making Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce the only confident starts for the week. Now, McCole Hardman is coming off a 19-point fantasy week, but he's just too risky of a play against a capable pass defense. The Lions and the Vikings. Now, it looks like Stafford will be held out this weekend, which may actually help assure fantasy owners of their sit decisions. I don't know how anybody can be a difficult decision in any of the Lions wideouts with Kenny Golladay out. Marvin Jones has been nothing but a disappointment this year, but you can't deny he has seen an increase in volume when Kenny G has sat. Marvin Jones can only be considered a low-end flex play with little to no floor. The only startable line is DeAndre Swift. Swift played over 60% of the team snaps last week and is starting to garner a stranglehold on this RB backfield. He'll be a solid RB2 this week and in many games going forward. As for the Vikings, I still don't think we can confidently say Cousins is a start, so find another option. You have to start his 2 top fantasy options, but that's only because all of Cousins' fantasy production is funneled entirely to Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Irv Smith Jr. is an easy sit this week, coming off a 1-catch game in Week 8, and even more so because the Lions have managed a top 10 defense against opposing tight ends through 2020. Dalvin Cook, Mr. Dalvin Cook. Enjoy, people, enjoy. Up next, Giants at Washington. Now, this could be a pretty tricky one here. Over under 43 with the line Washington favored 2.5 points there. Not much there. Now, Washington is a tough matchup against all positions and a defensive line that should have a field day against turnover-prone Daniel Jones. Now, Daniel Jones isn't startable in any formats, and his terrible play is making Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate sits for this upcoming week. The only reason we can start Darius Slayton is because how awesome he played last week. His awesome play didn't show up in the stat line as Daniel Jones missed Slayton on 3 or even 4 plays that could have resulted in touchdowns. Daniel Jones is playing his way out of New York, that's for sure. Evan Ingram can only be started because he's received 19 targets over the past 2 weeks, as the Giants have obviously been trying to work their star tight end more into the offensive game plan, and because the Washington football team have given up the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends in 2020. Not a fun play, and he will likely disappoint, but the volume and matchup point toward a good start for Ingram this week. As for the Giants' RBs, Freeman is going to miss this week with the same ankle sprain that kept him out Week 8. So Wayne Gallman is still a fine start. Hopefully Joe Judge recognizes what the rest of football community has known for 3 years now. Alfred Morris is done. I'm not sure why that dude is still getting touches. As for Washington, old Scary Terry is a must-start even against James Bradbury. He put up 7 catches for 74 yards in their previous matchup, and that's just fine. Terry is a threat for a long TD every week and still has a safe floor. McLaurin is a high-end wide receiver too, just about every week. Logan Thomas can be started only in 14-team leagues and deeper. He's paid off for fantasy owners in their previous 2 games, but he has absolutely no floor. As for Washington's running backs, Antonio Gibson is the only startable RB. He had a rough go of it in his last matchup against the Giants in Week 6, but he's done enough this season to merit an RB play this week. If you really need a guarantee of 6 points and nothing too much more, then you can play J.D. McKissick, but for all fantasy purposes, McKissick is a sit in Week 9. Texans at the Jags, over under 50.5, line Houston at -7. Deshaun Watson, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, and David Johnson are all good to go. Will Fuller has scored in 5 straight games and has actually been healthy this season. He's a low-end wide receiver 1. DJ is a low-end RB1 heading into a great matchup in a backfield that is truly his. Cooks is a solid wide receiver 2 just about every week, lacking some of the consistency that Fuller has shown this season. As for the Texans' tight ends, Jordan Akins is likely returning from his concussion. Unfortunately for fantasy purposes, Akins and Fells eat into each other's fantasy production, rendering the other not startable when they are in the lineup. As for the Jags, Gardner Minshew is inactive this week. That means 6th-round rookie Jake Luton will be getting the start against Houston. That's not great news for any of the Jags wide receivers. Chark is still a low-end flex play, but you can't have confidence playing any other receiving options for Jacksonville. Oh yeah, James Robinson. That dude is going to be helping people win a lot of fantasy leagues. Start him up. Raiders at Chargers, over under 51.5 with an even line. Derek Carr is a good sleeper pick against the Chargers, who have given up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing QBs in 2020. Both Henry Ruggs and Nelson Aguilar are good flex plays this coming week. Ignore both Carr and Aguilar's poor Week 8 stats because the win during that game was crazy. If Jacobs is playing, though, and he most likely will, start him up along with Darren Waller. For the Chargers, start Justin Herbert and his fantasy weapons of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Hunter Henry. Justin Jackson is also a solid RB2 start for the week, maybe a low-end one, but still a solid start against a subpar Raiders defense. Joshua Kelly has too many question marks right now to have confidence in this week. Next up, Dolphins at the Cardinals, over under 48.5 with Arizona favored by 4.5 points. With Tua in at QB, I'm not sure how we are supposed to confidently start any Dolphins wide receivers. I guess Devontae Parker can be started as a flex, but no wide receiver went for more than 20 yards last week. Yes, the Dolphins were ahead and could just run the ball as their defense absolutely handled the Rams' offensive line and Jared Goff, but to accumulate less than 5 yards an attempt is not great. Gesicki is only startable in 14-team leagues and deeper, and you are fine to start Patrick Laird as a flex play with both Gaskin and Breida ruled out for Week 9. For the Cardinals, start the usual suspects, D-Hop, Kyler, and now Chase Edmonds. It is time for the best RB in Arizona's backfield to get the touches he deserves. Kirk continues to be a good start as his fantasy outlook continues to tread in a positive direction. Saints at the Buccaneers, over under 50.5. Tampa Bay 4.5 is the line here. The Bucs have a great run defense. For Alvin Kamara, this may not be the best matchup, but he's a top 3 option each and every week. This does make Latavius Murray a sit, though. Drew Brees is finally startable with some confidence, even in a tough matchup because his stud wideout Michael Thomas is finally returning to the lineup. Michael Thomas was shut down the last time these two teams met, but simply having him in the lineup bodes well for Brees and this Saints offense. Start Michael Thomas, but lower expectations. Probably high-end wide receiver 2 this week against a really good Bucs defense. Now for the Bucs, Brady may be having an MVP season here. He has to be in the top 5 for MVP consideration. start the GOAT. And what do you know? The GOAT gets to play his second career game with Antonio Brown. Brown may be on a bit of a pitch count his first game back, but expect fireworks. That's all I'm going to say on the matter. Leonard Fournette is going to be trusted with more of the work since Ronald Jones fumbled last game. Both Fournette and Jones are RB2s, low end though, against a pretty good Saints run defense. Mike Evans is also a low end wide receiver 2 for the week. And go ahead and start Gronk. Closing up here, we have Patriots at the Jets, over under 42. The line being New England favored by 8. We're not going to spend so much time on this matchup here, benching everyone except Cam Newton, Damian Harris, and of course, if he plays, Jamison Crowder. That dude just seems to be producing in one of the worst teams in football. But again, that's only if he plays. We don't have confidence in any Jets, and the Patriots passing game has been pretty underwhelming. This Monday night game might suck, but hopefully some solid fantasy weeks make up for this dumpster fire of a football game. That'll do it for this week's 9 starter sit. For the latest and greatest in all things fantasy football, be sure to subscribe to Fantasy Friend Zone and follow us on Twitter. Have a great weekend, everybody.